My son set down his coffee, looked at me across the same kitchen table, where I'd taught him to tie a fishing knot, and said, "Mom, you're too old to run this place anymore." I didn't move. Behind him, through the window over the sink, the top row of Rome Beauties was going red the way it had gone red every September for 41 years. My husband's dented steel thermos was still on the shelf above the stove, where he'd left it the last morning. He walked out to check frost. My daughter-in-law stood at the counter, scrolling her phone like the conversation was a weather report. My 12-year-old grandson looked at the floor and didn't say one word. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I nodded, and I said, "All right," and I got up and washed my cup, because there was one thing my son didn't know. One thing his wife had never once thought to check. 19 days later, I sold the orchard. I didn't tell them. Not until it was already gone. Before I go on, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Have you ever given everything you had to a person, and then watched them treat you like furniture in your own living room? If you have, I'd like to hear about it below, and tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. I read those. Some nights they're the only company I have. Stay with me through this one. It gets worse before it gets better, and then it gets better in a way I never expected. The orchard sat 9.5 acres, up off Rutledge Road, about 20 minutes outside Hendersonville, North Carolina, on a slope that caught morning light before the rest of the valley woke up. My husband, Loretta Vance, bought it in 1983 with a loan he shouldn't have qualified for, and a stubbornness that scared the loan officer into approving him anyway. Rome Beauties, Galas, a stand of Arkansas blacks. He grafted himself the year our son was born. A cider press in the pole barn that leaked and never once got fixed properly. A drying barn with a woodshop in the back corner where Walter kept his hand planes lined up on a rack he built out of scrap poplar. I worked 34 years as an ICU nurse at the hospital in town. Nights, mostly. I'd come home at 7 in the morning, smelling like disinfectant, and Walter would already have the tractor running. And he'd cut the engine and walk over and kiss me on the forehead like I'd done something remarkable just by surviving the shift. Then he'd hand me a cup of coffee gone lukewarm in his thermos and go back to work. Walter died 4 years ago. Heart. He was sitting on the tailgate of the truck at the top of the hill, and by the time the ambulance made the last curve on Rutledge, he was already gone. The paramedic told me later that he'd been holding an apple. Not eating it, just holding it. People think grief arrives all at once, like a car through a wall. It doesn't. It moves in the way water moves into a basement. Slow, quiet. You don't notice until the bottom step is wet. The first winter, I stopped cooking real meals because there was nobody to cook them for. Then I stopped eating at the table. Then I stopped turning the porch light on at night because nobody was coming up that driveway. That first year, my son called all the time. Dean called on Sundays and sometimes Wednesdays. "Mom, you eating? You want me to come check the propane?" It sounded like love. Maybe some of it was, but I've learned something since then, and I'm going to say it plain. Some people only know how to love you carefully while they still need something from you. The call that changed my life came on a Tuesday in August. I was standing in the pantry counting jars. I still put up applesauce every year, out of habit, out of loyalty to a man who couldn't taste it anymore. When my phone rang, and my son was crying. Not the kind of crying a grown man does when he's embarrassed. The other kind. Vance Builders had gone under. A subdivision contract collapsed when the developer pulled financing. His bond got pulled. He'd already paid a framing crew out of pocket. Their savings were gone. They'd missed 2 mortgage payments on the house in Fletcher. Meredith's marketing hours had been cut. Noah's braces alone were $4,000. "We just need somewhere to land," Dean said. 6 months, maybe less. "I want you to understand something." I didn't hesitate, not for a second. I said, "This is your daddy's land. Come home." I've thought about that sentence more times than I can count. I don't think I'd take it back, but I'd say it differently now. They moved in the first week of September, right at the start of picking season. Dean, my son, Meredith, my daughter-in-law, and Noah, 12 years old, all elbows in silence. The first month was the best month I'd had in 4 years. Noah found Walter's hand planes and asked what they were for. I showed him how to seat the blade. He made a little box, crooked as anything, and gave it to me, and I put it on my nightstand and I have it still. Meredith cooked twice a week. Dean fixed the barn door that had been dragging since the ice storm. Somebody laughed in that house every single day. I gave them the big bedroom. The one Walter and I slept in for 4 decades, the one with the window facing the top rows. My knees don't love stairs anymore, and Noah needed a room, and it made sense. I moved my things into the sewing room at the end of the hall. Single bed, a dresser, the good Afghan. It's just for a little while, Meredith said, taping up a box. I believed her. God help me, I believed her all the way through. That fall, I paid the property taxes. I paid the propane, the homeowner's insurance, the electric, and the internet Dean needed for his job hunt. I bought Noah a laptop for school. I dipped into the annuity Walter left me. The one he set up so I'd never have to ask anybody for anything. To cover the orchard's liability insurance. Because I couldn't ask them for it, not while they were struggling. You don't have to do all this, Meredith told me once. But she took the check. Dean thanked me every time. Politely, like a man tipping a waitress. It was Meredith who worried me first, not because she was cruel. She wasn't, not then. It was the way she looked at rooms. She'd stand in a doorway and scan it, and I could see her mentally removing things. My mother's pressback chairs. The wallpaper. Me. In October I came in from the Rose and found Walter's canning jars. 300 of them, blue glass, some of them older than I am. Stacked in cardboard boxes by the back door. They were taking up the whole cellar shelf, Meredith said. I found the cutest baskets. I carried those boxes back down the cellar stairs myself. 16 trips. My knees swelled so bad that night I slept with a heating pad and 2 Tylenol. Nobody offered to help. Nobody noticed I was gone. Then it was the porch swing. Walter hung that swing the summer we got married. Meredith replaced it with a metal glider from a big box store because the chains looked unsafe. I found the swing behind the pole barn in the rain. Then it was the tools. I want to be careful here, because I know how it sounds. It's a hand plane. It's a chisel. It's a rusted draw knife with a worn spot in the handle exactly the shape of a dead man's thumb. I found them in a milk crate at the end of the driveway, next to a broken office chair, on trash day. I stood there in my nightgown at 6:40 in the morning, with a number 4 smoothing plane in my hands. And I thought about Walter kneeling on the shop floor teaching Dean to sharpen an iron on a wet stone. Back when Dean was Noah's age, and looked at his father, like the man had hung the moon on a hook. I brought them all back inside. Dean came into the kitchen while I was drying them. Mom, that stuff's rusted through. Your father's hands were on these. He sighed the way you sigh at a stubborn old woman. It's a plane. Nothing in that house was just a thing to me. Every single object in it had a person inside it. That was the year I began to understand that the memories keeping me upright were, to everybody else, clutter. The changes came faster after that, and smaller, which is how these things work. You don't get pushed out of your home. You get moved around inside it until there's nowhere left to stand. I stopped choosing what was on the television. Then I stopped being asked about supper. Then, one evening I came in from the Rose and my chair. The wingback by the wood stove. The one, with the sagging cushion shaped like the last 40 years of my body, had been moved to the corner facing the wall, to make room for a sectional they'd bought on a credit card. I heard Meredith on the phone that same week. She was standing in the mudroom, and she didn't know I was in the pantry. No, we're at the orchard now, she said. It's fine. The mother-in-law's here, but she keeps to herself. The mother-in-law, not Loretta, not Dean's mom, a category, a piece of the property that came with the deed. Noah changed too, which hurt worse. He used to sit at the kitchen island doing homework while I made supper, asking me questions about Walter. What was Grandpa like? Did he really drive the tractor into the creek? Was Dad ever any good at anything? By November, Noah's door stayed shut, headphones on. One evening I knocked with a plate of apple hand pies, and he said, through the door, "I'm not really hungry," and I heard him laugh at something on his screen a second later. Teenagers are careless. He wasn't even a teenager yet. But that night I sat on the edge of that little bed in the sewing room and cried, not about hand pies, but because I could feel myself going transparent in my own house. Dean got bolder in a different way. He stopped asking. He took the good chainsaw and left it out in the weather. He had 4 men over to watch a Panthers game, and they ate the entire pot of chili I'd made to freeze for the week. And when I opened the empty pot, he said, "Oh, hope that's cool." And then, in February, I came in from the mailbox and the mail had already been opened. 2 envelopes. My Medicare statement, and a statement from Farm Credit about the operating account. Dean. "Did you open my mail?" He didn't even look up from his laptop. Thought it might be important. It's a federal offense to open somebody else's mail. He laughed. Not meanly, worse than meanly. He laughed the way you laugh at a child who's discovered a rule and is very proud of it. "Mom, we all live here." Something went cold and low in my stomach then. Not anger, fear. Because a guest doesn't open your mail. Only an owner opens your mail. 3 nights later, I went down for water around midnight and stopped on the landing because the kitchen light was on and they were talking low. Dean said, "Comps on the road frontage alone are pushing 450. Maybe more if it's rezoned." Meredith said, "Not yet." She'd lose her mind. And my son, who I sat up with for 11 nights, when he had pneumonia at 6 years old, who I fed with a spoon while the fever cooked him. My son said, "She's not gonna be here forever, Mer." I stood in the dark for a long time. Long enough that my hand went numb around the banister. Every instinct in me said, "Walk in there. Turn on the light. Make them look at me." I didn't. Because once a person says out loud who they really are, you can never go back to pretending. And I wasn't ready yet to lose the version of my son I'd been carrying around in my head for 41 years. I went back upstairs. I sat on that single bed until the sky turned gray. And I understood, finally, that my son wasn't waiting for me to die. He was waiting for me to be gone. There is a difference. And the difference is that one of them you can hurry along. By March, the word changed. It wasn't your place anymore. It was our place. Our road frontage, our south slope, our barn. I heard it a dozen times before I let myself hear it once. The harvest dinner is what broke it open. Not harvest, we did it in April for the bloom, because Walter always said the bloom was prettier than the picking. Meredith took it over. She spent close to $600 on it. Rented chairs, string lights in the rows. She invited 11 people, and not one of them was a person I knew. Some of Dean's contacts, she said, arranging branches in a jar. And Loretta, try not to bring up anything heavy tonight. I looked up from the potatoes I was peeling because she'd been peeling nothing. Heavy? She waved her hand. You know, Walter, the hospital stories, your hip, my husband, my work, my body. All of it filed under things that ruin an evening. I wore the blue blouse. Walter said matched my eyes, and I put on lipstick for the first time since the funeral. And when I came down the stairs, Meredith looked at me and said, "Oh, you dressed up," in a tone that made me want to go change. They came at 7. A landman named Grant Whitlock, who worked for a company called Ridgeline Communities, and who said, "Great bones about my house" within 4 minutes of walking through the door. 2 couples from Dean's old contractor network. A woman from Meredith's office. Whitlock said, "Frontage like this on Rutledge, with the county easing setbacks. You're sitting on something." Dean smiled. "We've had thoughts. We." Then Whitlock turned to me, kindly, the way people are kind to somebody's grandmother. "And what do you do with your days, Mrs. Vance?" The table went quiet for half a second, and my son's wife filled it. "Oh, she reorganizes things," Meredith said, "and she watches her programs." Somebody laughed. My face went hot. "I run the orchard," I said, "and I volunteer Tuesdays at the church pantry." "She used to run the orchard," Dean said. He said it gently. "That's the part I can't forget." He said it gently, correcting me, the way you'd correct a child about what year it is. "Mom's been forgetting things. She left the burner on last month." "That happened one time," I said. Meredith tilted her head. "We just worry." And Dean, leaning back, wine in his hand, in my husband's chair. "We've actually toured Brookhaven. It's real nice. They've got a garden." 11 strangers turned and looked at me the way you look at a problem somebody else is handling. One woman said, "Is that something you want, Mrs. Vance?" Before I could answer, Meredith laughed. "Loretta doesn't love change." I set down my fork. I said, "I'm sitting right here. Nobody would meet my eyes. Not one person at that table." And that's when I understood something that I think about every day now. They believed her. Every one of them believed her over me. Because an older woman disappears so slowly that by the time she says something, people have already stopped listening for her voice. I went to the kitchen to breathe. Noah followed me. For half a heartbeat I thought he'd come to say something kind. He leaned against the counter and said, "Mom says don't take it personal." I looked at my grandson. He had Walter's chin. "Noah, do you think I'm too old to run this place?" He hesitated. That hesitation went through me like a nail. It hurt worse than anything anybody said out loud that night. "I just think Mom's stressed," he said, and he went back out. Everybody always had a reason. 2 weeks later, Dean sat me down in the living room, with his hands folded, like a manager about to let somebody go. "Noah needs a real room for school. I'm working out of the dining room. It's not sustainable." A pause. "We've been thinking. What if you took the drying barn?" I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. The drying barn is a 100-year-old chestnut frame building with a dirt floor in the back half, a wood stove, and no plumbing except a spigot on the outside wall. Walter's shop is in the corner. "You want me to live in a barn?" "We'd insulate it," Meredith said quickly. "Put in a bathroom eventually. It'd be like a cottage." "People pay for that. People pay for that," I repeated. Dean rubbed his forehead like I was exhausting him. "Mom, don't make this a whole thing. I gave you my bedroom, and we appreciated it." Appreciated. Past tense. Like gratitude had a shelf life and mine had turned. "I'm not moving into the barn," I said. Meredith crossed her arms. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. She won't adapt." Adapt. I had adapted out of my bedroom, out of my chair, out of my kitchen, out of my own name. And here is the sentence they use on us. All of us. Every woman my age has heard some version of it. "You don't need all that space anymore. You don't need the room. You don't need the truck. You don't need the checkbook. You don't need to be asked." Little by little the world sands you down until you fit in a corner, and then it congratulates you for being easy to have around. 2 mornings after that, at 6:10 in the morning, somebody knocked on my door. A young couple with duffel bags. Very apologetic. They said the listing told them to check in at the main house if the barn's lockbox was stuck. The listing. Meredith had put the drying barn on a short-term rental site, photographed it, named it the Orchard Loft, Rustic Retreat. $210 a night. She'd already taken deposits for 6 weekends. She'd moved Walter's rack of hand planes out to the pole barn to stage it, and she'd left his workbench in the photos because, and I am quoting her, it added character. I stood in my nightgown in the doorway and told those poor kids there'd been a mistake, and I refunded them out of my own account. And then I walked out to the barn and sat down on Walter's workbench and put my hands flat on the wood and stayed there until my legs went to sleep. That afternoon, I called Dean at the job site. "Mom, it's found money. It's literally sitting there." "It's not yours." There was a silence on that phone line, and then my son said the thing he'd been circling for 8 months. "Mom, come on, let's be realistic. You're too old to run this place anymore. It's ours to figure out. It's just paperwork that hasn't caught up yet." "Paperwork that hasn't caught up," I said. "All right," and I hung up. Then I sat in my truck, in the church parking lot for 2 hours. Because I couldn't go home, and there was nowhere else in Henderson County I belonged anymore. Pastor Reuben Ellis found me there. He'd known Walter. He got in the passenger side without asking, and let me cry until I was done. And when I told him, all of it, the barn, the mail, the $450,000, the "she's not gonna be here forever," he didn't tell me to pray on it. He said, "Loretta, God never once asked you to stay somewhere your dignity gets eaten a bite at a time. I want you to hear that, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from tonight." Patience is not the same thing as permission. The next morning, I did the hardest, most ordinary thing I have ever done in my life. I drove to a print shop, and I paid $4, and I typed up a letter, and I served my own son with a 30-day notice to vacate. I put it in his hand at the kitchen table. My hands shook so badly the paper rattled. Dean read it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. And Meredith took it out of his hand, read 2 lines, and tore it in half. Not dramatically. Casually. The way you tear a coupon that's expired. "Loretta," she said, "you're not going to do that." She was right about one thing. I wasn't going to do that. I was going to do something they hadn't thought of, because to think of it, they'd have had to remember I was a person with a name on a piece of paper. I called Everett Pike. Everett had been Walter's lawyer for 30 years, and he was Walter's friend before that. At the funeral, in the vestibule, he'd taken my hands and said something I hadn't understood at the time. He said, "Walter left something with me." He was very specific. He said not to give it to you when you're grieving. He said, "Give it to you the day you come asking on your own." I'd nodded and forgotten it, the way you forget everything in the first week. 4 years later, I called him at 9:15 on a Wednesday morning and I said, "Everett, I think my son is trying to take my land." And he was quiet for 4 full seconds and then said, "Come down here, right now." His office is above the old insurance building on Main Street, and it still has the elevator that groans. When I walked in, Everett stood up. He looked directly at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. That's all it took. I hadn't cried in front of another human being in 4 years, and I did it before I sat down. He listened to everything. He didn't interrupt once, and the longer I talked, the harder his face got. When I finished, he asked, "Have they had you sign anything?" "No, no power of attorney, no deed of gift, no co-signing, nothing. Nothing." He let out a breath. "Good." He opened a file drawer and set a folder in front of me. "Loretta. In 2011, after Walter's first heart scare, he came in here and he did something I argued with him about. He deeded this land to you. Solely. Not jointly. Not through a will. Yours, outright while he was still alive, so nothing could ever be contested. I know the orchard's mine." Everett took off his glasses. "No, ma'am. I don't think you understand what I'm telling you. Your son has no legal interest in that property. None. Not now. Not after you're gone unless you say so. Not 1 square foot." Something happened in my chest. It wasn't relief. It was power. And I had forgotten I ever had any. "Why?" I said slowly. "Did Walter do that?" Everett looked out the window for a second. He told me he was worried Dean confused being loved with being owed. That sentence hit me so hard I had to put my hand on the desk. Because it wasn't cruel. It was just true, and it was in my husband's voice, and he'd known it before I did. Then Everett said, "There's more." He slid a photocopy across the desk. It was a boundary survey request, Ridgeline Communities. Dated 11 months ago, a month before Dean's business collapsed, before the tearful phone call, before they moved in, and there was a second document. A private lender in Charlotte had run a soft credit inquiry tied to a personal financial statement filed by Dean Walter Vance. On that statement, under assets, Dean had listed the orchard. "He can't borrow against my land," I said. "He can't." Everett agreed. "But he told somebody he could." I sat there with the paper in my hands, and I heard it all again in order. The tearful call, the 6 months, the bedroom, the tools, the barn on a rental site, Whitlock at my dinner table. It's just paperwork that hasn't caught up. They hadn't come home because they'd fallen. They'd come home because I was in the way, and a mother is the easiest kind of obstacle to move. Because she'll help you move her. Everett let me sit with it. Then he reached into the bottom drawer and took out an envelope, yellowed at the edge, and set it in front of me. Walter's handwriting on the front. 4 words. "For Loretta. When she asks." I couldn't open it in that office. My throat wouldn't let me. Everett walked me to the door. Before I left, he said, "Loretta, listen to me. You are not responsible for the life your son built on top of your grave." I opened the letter that night, in the truck, in the driveway, with the porch light off. "Lori, if Everett gave you this, it's because you finally walked in there and told the truth about something. That means it's bad. It also means you're still you, and I'm glad. I know what you'll be doing. You'll be trying to figure out how to fix it so nobody has to feel bad. You've done that since you were 22 years old and holding a stranger's hand at 4 in the morning while he died. Here's what I know. And I want you to read it twice. A place stops being home the day you have to earn your seat at the table. If that day comes, sell it. Sell every stick and every tree, and don't you dare look back or feel 1 ounce of guilt over it. The trees were never the point. You were the point. You were always the point. Waltery sat in that truck and cried the way you cry when you're finally alone enough to. Ugly. Loud. My forehead on the steering wheel. Because, even 4 years dead, my husband saw me better than the living people asleep upstairs in my bed. Margie Duplantis and I have known each other since 1979. She sold real estate in this county for 31 years, and she went to church with Walter and me, and she has eaten Thanksgiving dinner at my table more times than my own son has. We met at a coffee shop on 7th Avenue, and I told her everything, not the legal part, the other part. The mail, the barn, the dinner table. Margie's jaw got tight. That boy, she said. He's still my son. Loretta, they can be both. She stirred her coffee. So what do you want? And here's where it turned. Because I opened my mouth to say I want to sell it, and what came out instead was, I want to make sure it can never be a subdivision. Ever. Even after I'm dead. Margie put her cup down and looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, then we're not calling a developer. We're calling Blue Ledge. Blue Ledge Conservancy is a land trust that operates across 4 counties. What they do, and I did not know this before, so I'll say it plain for anybody out there sitting on family land, is they'll pay you for a conservation easement. You still sell your property, but the easement rides with the deed forever. No subdivision, no pavement. It has to stay working farmland. It reduced the sale price. I don't care. Let me say that again, because I know somebody out there is doing math right now. It cost me money, and I don't care, because it made it permanent. It made it something my son could never undo, no matter who he married, no matter what he told a lender, no matter how long he waited for me to die. Margie listed it quietly. Off market. 3 showings. The buyers were a couple named Caleb and Simone Ashby. 29 and 31. He'd been managing an orchard down in Polk County for somebody else for 6 years. She taught high school biology and wanted out. They walked the rows on a Thursday morning, while Dean was at a job site, and Meredith was in Asheville. Caleb spent 20 minutes in the drying barn looking at Walter's workbench, and he didn't say one word about tearing it out. He asked if the shop tools conveyed. He said, that's a Stanley 4.5. My granddad had one, and Simone found the Arkansas Black's axe. I told her Walter grafted them the year Dean was born. She put her hand flat on the trunk of the biggest one, and she stood there for a while, and when she turned around she was crying. Over a tree. My daughter-in-law had wanted to bulldoze that whole row because black apples photograph badly. That was the moment. It wasn't the money. They weren't even the highest offer. It's that 2 strangers walked onto my husband's land and saw a life on it, and my own family had walked onto it and seen a lot. I accepted on a Monday. Closing was set for the 12th, and for 19 days, my son and his wife lived in my house and planned their renovation of a property that no longer had a future with their names anywhere near it. That was the strangest part of my whole life. Not the betrayal, the 19 days. Meredith showed me quartz countertop samples on her phone. Dean measured the dining room wall he wanted to take out. They talked about a fire pit. They talked about the loft rental. Once we sort out Mom's situation. Every evening I packed a little more of my life into boxes, and Margie carried them out to her Buick on the afternoons. The 2 of them were gone, and nobody ever asked me what I was doing. You could carry your entire existence out the front door of your own house, and if you're a woman past a certain age, nobody will look up. Only Noah noticed. He knocked on the sewing room door about a week before closing, holding one of Walter's old flannel shirts I'd left in the dryer. Grandma? Are you moving out? I sat down on the bed. What makes you ask? I saw boxes in Miss Margie's car. Children see everything. They just don't have the words yet, so we assume they're blind. I said, I'm figuring something out. He stood in the doorway a while, twisting the shirt. Then he said, Mom says you've been acting weird. What do you think? He looked at the floor for a long time, and then, so quiet I almost missed it. I think everybody's mean now. My throat closed up. He said, Grandma? Was Mom always like this? And I thought about how to answer that, because he deserved a true answer, and not a comfortable one. I thought about Dean at 9 years old, crying because he found a dead bird under the pear tree, and wanted to bury it in a shoebox with a note inside. No, I said. Your daddy wasn't. Noah's eyes filled up. I heard them talking about how much the land's worth. I know, baby. I didn't say anything. His chin went. I should have said something. I put my arms out and my grandson walked into them and cried on my shoulder, and I held on to him. And it was the first time, anybody had touched me with tenderness in 240 days. I know because I counted. That's the kind of thing you count when nobody's counting you. Closing took 51 minutes. I've been in the room when people died. I've held a woman's hand while her body stopped. I know what a life-changing hour feels like. And I'm here to tell you it almost never comes with thunder. Usually it's fluorescent lights and bad coffee, and somebody explaining where to initial. Everett came. Margie came. Caleb and Simone sat across the table and signed, and Simone's hand shook worse than mine. When the last page was done, Everett capped his pen and said, "That's it. 41 years. Bloom after bloom. Walter's chestnut barn, the creek, the graft scar on that Arkansas black." Caleb stood up and shook my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting us with it. Not with the property. With it." He knew the difference, and my son never did. At 1:47 in the afternoon, I handed a young man from Polk County the keys to my husband's orchard. At 1:49 my phone rang. "Mom." Dean's voice was strange. "There's a truck in the driveway and a woman putting a sign on the fence post." I looked out the window of the title office at Main Street. "Mom, what is going on? Why does the sign say sold?" I said, "Because I sold it." There was a sound on the line I hope I never hear again. Then a crash, his phone hitting something, and Meredith's voice, high and thin, and then Dean was back, and he wasn't crying. He was screaming. "You had no right. Watch your voice," I said. "No right to do that without talking to us. We live here. You lived there because I allowed it." The line went dead quiet. In 41 years my son had never once heard me say a sentence like that. Then Meredith took the phone. Loretta, listen to me. Where are we supposed to go?" "You have 30 days. The buyers were generous." "30 days? You had 30 days 3 weeks ago," I said. "You tore it up." Then I heard Dean, away from the phone, and his voice had changed completely. Not angry, not even loud. "Scared," he said. The Charlotte note." My whole body went cold. Meredith said, "What?" He said it again, and something in his voice cracked apart. "The Charlotte note, Meredith," I said, very carefully. "Dean, what note?" "Nothing." Breathing. "Dean Walter Vance. What did you borrow?" And it was my daughter-in-law who answered, in a small, flat, awful voice, like a woman reading the results of a test she already knew. $118,000, she said, "for the equipment, to restart the company." A pause. "Personally guaranteed." He said it was fine because the orchard was going to be ours anyway. Going to be ours anyway. I put my hand over my mouth and I stood in a title company lobby and I cried. And Margie put her arm around me, and it wasn't grief for the trees. It was grief because there it was, out loud, no dressing on it. Not love. Not family. A schedule. My son had borrowed against a day he expected me to be dead, and then he'd gotten impatient with how long it was taking. Dean got the phone back. He was hyperventilating. "You've destroyed us. You understand that? You have destroyed my family." I said, "No. What's unbelievable is how comfortable the two of you got, living with somebody you'd already buried." And then, in the background, I heard Noah, "Dad." Dean said, "Not now, bud. Dad." My grandson's voice was shaking, but it did not stop. "You were mean to her, both of you. I heard everything you said. I'm not stupid." There was silence, a whole family's worth of silence. Then a door slammed so hard I heard it through the phone, 3 counties away. Out of all of them, the son I raised, the woman he married, a 12-year-old boy, was the only one who could say the true thing out loud. I hung up. I have not regretted it for one single day. I rented a brick cottage on a side street near Jackson Park, in town, 900 square feet, a dogwood in the front yard, and a screened porch just big enough for 2 chairs and a pot of geraniums. The first night was so quiet I couldn't sleep. Not lonely, just quiet. No footsteps over my head. No conversation stopping when I walked in. Nobody sighing at me. Around 10 o'clock my body did something strange. My shoulders came down. I hadn't known they were up. They fought all through those 30 days. Noah told me later, a little at a time, the way children release things. Dean blamed Meredith for pushing. Meredith blamed Dean for the loan. Dean filed Chapter 7 in the fall. They gave up the Fletcher house. Meredith went to stay with her sister in Greenville for 4 months, and for a while, nobody was sure that was temporary. Everett said, "There might have been exposure. That listing an asset you don't own on a financial statement isn't nothing." I told him I would not pursue it. He looked at me a long time and said, "Mothers," and closed the folder. "You can want justice and still not want to be the one holding the hammer." Noah started coming to the cottage on Saturdays. He'd ride his bike 3 miles and show up sweating and eat everything in my refrigerator. We built a little bench together on the porch out of poplar scraps, using Walter's planes, which Caleb Ashby had personally boxed up and driven into town and set on my porch without being asked. Meredith came in October. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd lost weight in the wrong way. She stood on my porch and said, "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need to say something out loud." I let her in. She sat at my little table with her hands around a mug of tea she didn't drink, and she said, "I did the math on your annuity in April. I looked up how much it paid out." She stared into the mug. "I actually made a spreadsheet." I didn't speak. There wasn't anything to say to that. "I don't know when I stopped thinking of you as a person," she said. "I've been trying to find the day. I can't find it. It just happened, a little at a time, and every time you didn't fight back, it got easier." That's the sentence I'd give to every woman listening tonight, if I could only give you one. Every time you didn't fight back, it got easier. Dean took until December. He came on a Sunday in the rain and stood on my porch with his hat in his hands, like a man come to confess to a sheriff. He'd lost 30 pounds. He was doing framing work for another man's company, on another man's schedule. We sat for a long time and neither of us said anything. Then he said, "I keep trying to figure out when I decided you weren't real." I let that sit. "After Dad died," he said, and his voice broke on the word Dad. "Every time I looked at you, I saw him gone. And I couldn't stand it, so I started thinking about the land instead. The land was a problem I could solve. You weren't." Then my son, 41 years old, put his face in his hands at my kitchen table and sobbed like he was 9 and holding a shoebox with a dead bird in it. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because I know what a story is supposed to do here. It's supposed to end with everybody hugging in the kitchen. I didn't hug him. Not that night. I made him a plate. I let him eat it. And when he left, I said, "Dean, I forgave you a while back, because I wasn't going to spend whatever years I have left being bitter, but forgiving you and trusting you are 2 entirely different animals, and one of them takes a lot longer to raise." He nodded. He said, "That's fair." It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 10 years. In January, I asked them both to come, and I put a folder on the table. Meredith opened it and went white. It was a 529 college savings plan, North Fishery, Noah Walter Vance, funded in one lump out of the orchard money. Dean stared at it. "Mom, it isn't for you," I said. He let out a little broken laugh. "No, I guess it isn't. Your father and I put you through school and you graduated owing nobody a thing," I said. "You never once said thank you. I don't think you ever knew you were supposed to. That's my fault as much as anybody's. So I'm doing it different this time." Meredith was crying with her hand over her mouth. I said, "I spent a year listening to the 2 of you talk about what you were going to inherit. Not one time did either of you ask what Noah needed." Then I said the thing I'd figured out on that porch, alone in the fall, and I'll leave it with you. Real love protects. It does not take possession. I turned 72 in the spring. Margie made a caramel cake. Odessa Pruitt from the Tuesday book club at the library brought a candle shaped like a bee for no reason anybody could explain. There are 11 of us in that group. 9 are widows. When I told them what happened, not one of them looked shocked, and I don't know if that comforted me or broke my heart. That's how common this is. That's how many of us quietly vanish inside our own families, while everybody at the table agrees nothing's wrong. In May, Simone Ashby called and asked if I'd come out and show her how Walter used to thin the Gallus. I drove up Rutledge Road, and my hands sweated on the wheel the whole way. The porch swing was back up. Caleb had found it behind the pole barn and rehung it on new chain. I stood in the rows for 2 hours in the sun and taught a 31-year-old biology teacher how my husband did a thing. And when I left, she hugged me and said, "Come back whenever. It's still yours, you know." And I drove home to my little brick cottage and my dogwood and my 900 square feet. And I sat on my porch and I realized I did not miss it. Not the way I expected to. I miss Walter. I will miss Walter until they put me in the ground beside him. But the house stopped being my home a long time before the sign went in the yard. It stopped the day I had to knock on doors inside it. Here is what nobody tells you when you're a young woman with a baby on your hip. They tell you that love means giving. They tell you patience is a virtue, and silence is strength. And a good mother is a woman who never needs anything. And then you get old, and you find out those lessons were never really for your benefit. I'm not bitter. I got a son back. A smaller, humbler, truer son than the one I lost. And that's the only kind worth having. I got a grandson who will be the first Vance to understand that a house is not a lottery ticket with a person living inside it. But it cost me 41 years of trees, and it should never have cost me anything at all. So if you're sitting somewhere tonight in a room you paid for, in a house you built, wondering whether you're being oversensitive, whether you're making too much of it, whether it's easier to just take the smaller room, please hear an old nurse who has watched a great many people run out of time. Getting older does not make you less valuable. Your kindness is not a down payment. Keeping the peace is not the same as having any. And you are never, not at 71, not at 91, too old to choose yourself. If any part of this found you tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd tell me below. Tell me whether you think Dean earned his second chance. I still don't know some days. Tell me what you would have done in my kitchen that morning. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are, because I read them all, and because some nights the kindest voices in my life belong to strangers. Stay with me here, at Mercy After Dusk. There are more of these to tell, and every last one of them belongs to somebody who was told she'd stopped mattering, and found out otherwise.